I'm recording this webinar so that it can be viewed at a later date and people can use it to get questions answered as well. So a couple of housekeeping items before we get started. I am going to ask that you go ahead and that you keep your lines muted as well as keep your video off. This will improve the bandwidth, help everybody be able to see and hear the PowerPoint a little bit better. Can you hear me? Amber, can you hear me?
All right, yes, I can hear you.
Okay, perfect. Sorry, I note that it was hard hearing me. I apologize for that. So a couple housekeeping things, video off as well as audio off. However, the reason for we're having this is to get questions answered and educate and inform. So if you have any questions, feel free to place them in the chat box at any time. We'll hold them for the end, and then you also will have the chance to unmute yourself and ask a question if needed too. Kind of the schedule I have for you here up for you here on the screen. The first thing I want to do is quickly go back over the Japanese beetle and what it is, the harm it could potentially cause. That will kind of help you understand what WSDA does during certain times of the year, as well as what you can do. And then I'm going to kind of roll into what it's typically looked like in Washington State, what it's looked like over the past couple of years, and what it is developing into and ongoing with. So with that being said, let's get started looking at this adult beetle. It's important that we know what it looks like so that we can identify it. We're going to be seeing the adults now. In the summer, they might start to merge mid-May all the way through mid-October. So if you're outside and about, you might be seeing this green metallic-y beetle. It's going to be that color on its head. On its thorax, you'll see a little bit of area behind it that's green and metallic-y in color as well. If it's not flying, you'll be able to see its copper wing covers folded over it there. The last distinguishing feature that this beetle has is you might see white tufts hanging off the side and towards the end of it. They're actually little hair patches. There's 5 on each side and 2 on that tip of that abdomen. This beetle, I don't know how you characterize your insects, but it's about 1/3 to 1/2 inch long. For me, it's close to the size of my fingernail. When it's not in that adult form, it's going to look like a larva or a grub. And we aren't going to see these because they're going to be below the soil surface, okay? They're typically found below the surface in the spring, and they're about 1/8 to 1 inch long. They are characterized as a white C-shaped grub, but it does have kind of a brown tan head, and you're able to see the legs on it. The thing about this grub, though, is it's going to be hard to differentiate this grub to other grubs. They look kind of alike. A specimen or a sample typically needs to be collected and observed underneath a microscope to definitely confirm if it is a Japanese beetle larva. Now that we know what they look like, we are able to look for them. And we're going to talk about the seasons that we're going to see them again as well. Knowing the life cycle of the beetle is going to help you understand why we're doing when we're doing and what you can do. So in the middle, right, you see the summer. That's where we're at right now, but I'm going to back us up into the prior season, which was last spring, okay? In the spring, we didn't see those adults because remember, they're those grubs or their larvae below the soil surface. And those grubs are hungry. So they're actually going around beneath the dirt and eating. What they're going to be eating are grass roots. So this could be the roots of the grass in your lawn. This could be sod or turf grass, etc. And they're actually capable of moving around in that soil to find the proper soil moisture, temperature, as well as the correct amount of food. As we kind of leave into the spring, remember we get into summer, and then those grubs and larvae are going to pupate and then morph into those adult beetles that we're seeing now. Those beetles we're seeing now are flying around, eating, mating, going back to the soil, laying eggs, and repeating that cycle. As we go closer into the fall, those adults are going to decease. But remember, those eggs they laid are going to hatch back into grubs, okay? So now that we know their life cycle, those adults that we're seeing right now, what are those harms they're causing as they're flying around and eating? So they're typically going to eat green, leafy, vegetative material or foliage. And they do this by skeletonizing leaves. So you see that beetles on the leaf in the picture there and how they're chomping away. They'll eat and skeletonize at the leaf until it's basically dead. The plant can't absorb any nutrients up through it. They're super invasive because they really don't discriminate on what they eat. They'll feast on over 300 types of plants, including some of our major agriculture we have around, like grapes, hop, and corn, as well as your backyard roses. You see, I put roses on there because they also like to eat buds of flowers and occasionally even the flowers of fruit. We briefly touched on the larvae and how they can eat the grass roots. And I just wanted to show you a couple pictures of what that destruction could look like. So obviously, if we're losing our grass roots, our grass can't grow. So typically, if people have detected Japanese beetle, they'll go ahead and start watering and watering their lawns in the spring, and it's just not turning green. That grass, the roots are gone, it's not able to uptake the water. And really bad cases, people can sometimes lift that grass up like a sheet of carpet. Then you see the picture I have over on the right where it shows kind of more intense feeding. The other thing to think about when we have all of these grubs below the soil, they're a really tasty snack for birds, rodents, and various animals. So they're going to dig at them and destruct the lawn even more. The last kind of threat I want to talk about the beetle is that it's a really good hitchhiker. Mean it's capable of catching rides on various things and moving itself around. It's capable of flying in airplanes, riding in trucks, as well as moving on trains, okay? But it's typically found at airports with air cargo that's flying from its native range or from Eastern United States. I'll explain that a little bit later. But the beetle, remember, in the summer, it's hanging out in our lawns and it's eating our vegetables, our vegetable foliage. So if any of that yard debris is moved around, it could transport that beetle. Then when it's grub form, it's below the soil surface. So if any of that sod or dirt is moved or a potted plant that has the beetle larvae in it, then those beetles could travel with it as well. The last thing to touch on is the beetle's pretty good at reproducing, and each season or each life cycle it has, it's capable of laying 40 to 60 eggs if it would like. So that could be some rapid expansion. Now that we kind of understand the threats of the beetle, I want to talk about what it's historically looked like in Washington, and kind of then dive deeper into our response over the last few years and what we're doing currently. So I mentioned that it has a native range. Since it's the Japanese beetle, it's coming out of Japan, and it's characterized as a scarab beetle based off what it does and what it eats. In 1916, it was first found in the United States over in the East Coast in New Jersey. And actually, since then, it's pretty much established in half of the United States on the east side, right? So the East Coast has a Japanese beetle. To protect the rest of the states that don't have Japanese beetle, they all got together and basically made a plan to keep beetles out of places it already isn't. To kind of coordinate and highlight this plan, Washington started surveying for the beetle in the 90s. When I talk about surveying, I mean trapping, meaning we're going out looking for the beetle and we're placing traps trying to catch them. Previously, I mentioned it's a good hitchhiker and it finds itself in on planes, okay? So typically, in the past, if we've ever found a beetle, we're able to say it's a one and done. It's found near an airport and was associated with air cargo. That beetle is then removed. The airport treats and no population is ever established, okay? So that's kind of maybe typical of something we might find. We're very careful and we make sure to clean that up, but it doesn't develop into a population. The map you see here, I didn't explain it, I apologize, but you see the orange squares on it. That's where we've placed a trap to survey for a beetle. You can see some red diamonds where they've been caught. So you see some red diamonds over by an airport. That was typical. But then if you look over towards those Yakima and Benton counties, you see these two diamonds. That was an unusual detection. We detected one beetle in Sunnyside and two beetles in Grandview. This really raised the alarm for us and got us to start thinking about our trapping areas for the following year. So this was in 2020 when we first found these three beetles, okay? We started planning trapping and we started some outreach on social media as the season got closer to ask people if you've seen them. And actually in response, a resident from Grandview said, yes, last summer I started picking these off my roses and I collected about 80 beetles. What this did for us is it kind of confirmed the thought process of, oh, we have a problem. Good thing we started this response, and now we can really get to work spreading the word even further and doing massive trapping. So move forward to 2021 or last season. Here's how this process started. At the very beginning, we started a quarantine process, okay? And that's to make sure that if the beetles are present and we're finding a lot of them, we're able to keep them from transporting to other areas, okay? So the idea of starting the quarantine means let's figure out the extent of that infestation. To figure out where all those beetles are, we have to start trapping. So we started this massive trapping effort in and around the Grandview area where those beetles were found, as well as around registered nurseries, okay? Couple other things we did is we gave out identification cards to growers and agricultural workers in the area. We started attending various conferences, held an initial homeowner webinar, made sure to distribute all reporting materials in paper and electronic form to places in the area, and continued on with that social media reporting campaign. If you happen to live in that current infested area, you might even recall seeing this initial postcard hit your mailbox. What this postcard dictated for you was everything we found during that last trapping season last summer. We captured over 24,000 beetles inside that Grandview area in 650 traps, which ended up being roughly about 49 square miles, covering both of those Yakima and Benton counties. Okay, so then we wrapped up that 2021 trapping season and started planning for the season we are currently in now, okay? We've already done a couple things this season, so I'm going to kind of backtrack and get you up to speed. Okay, so we initially started that quarantine process, and then the next step was to service his business in that proposed area, saying, if we kept Japanese beetle out for moving, we're going to have to stop moving certain articles that might transport it or figure out a way to move them safely and free of beetles. If we have to do that, what is it going to look like for you? Okay, then we held another open house, and then we started to think about treatment, okay? Remember those grubs, they live below the surface and they like to eat something. They like to eat those roots of that grass, okay? So we started requesting landowner consent for free treatment of people's yards of lawns, right? Treating that grassy areas. To get consent to treatment, we also started attending some events, including the spring cleanup days, the spring fling in the park. We actually did a couple of radio interviews, so continued on with social media, and some of our program specialists even began walking around the neighborhood, knocking on doors and asking for consent. So people that gave us permission then were able to have their lawn areas treated for free. The next thing we did was we hired a contractor for that insecticide treatment. We treated over 2,000 properties on a little over 1,000 acres to keep those grubs at bay. Our current treatment status for this year is that we are completed with them. Then I kind of want to talk about it because you might be thinking, well, I had my property treated, but I am still seeing adult beetles, okay? This is why we got to back into this life cycle. That treatment that we sprayed actually targeted those beetles that are going to be coming, or the grubs that are going to be coming up this fall. So look at this picture here, right? You see the spring months, right, of the May and June, okay, where that treatment was applied. Those grubs the pupae is really, really big. So the adult beetles are still going to be able to hatch. That treatment's sitting there in the soil for that time here in this fall where those eggs are turning into the grubs. Remember, those grubs are hungry, so then they're going to start eating. Then they inherit that insecticide and they won't be able to move forth into those winter months, okay? That's why we're still seeing the adult beetles now. We knew that was an intention. With that being said, right, I kind of want to reiterate how this treatment and this process is going to take multiple years. And it's also going to require a little bit of cooperation. I would just want you to think if you have your property, you treat it, and your neighbor to the right treats it, right? Your Japanese problem and your grass is, being managed and being handled, and we're going to get those beetles and those grubs out of the ground. However, if your neighbor on the left doesn't, they're still potentially producing beetles. Beetles don't exactly respect boundaries, so those adult beetles might come up from your neighbor's house and still be able to fly over and eat the leaves of your tomato plants or various garden things. So something we can do is treatments, consents are going to be coming out again this winter. We start thinking about looking for them and giving consent to treat your property for next spring. All right, so we've talked about eradication and the forms of treatment. The next thing that we're doing in the form of eradication or providing complete removal of this pest is trapping, okay? So we started off that trapping response in and around that Grandview area. You can see the map here and you see all these green squares on it. That's a location of one of our Japanese beetle traps. This is an internal map we have here at WSDA. You can also see that we place some traps periodically outside of the boundary to potentially see if the beetles are spreading and make sure that we're keeping them inside that infested area. We initially placed over 2,300 traps in that area, and they get checked out every 7 to 10 days. I also have a picture on the bottom left here for you of a bag trap that is very similar to the ones we are using. Now, our bag traps hopefully don't ever get this full of beetles because this is a bag trap that comes from the East Coast. You can see how many beetles can be collected in an area where it's established, and we don't want that. Now, trapping has developed a little bit, right? And maybe you've seen it in the headlines over the last week, but unfortunately, we did catch beetles outside of that original trapping area. We did get an alert from a resident who found beetles in Wapato, and then we additionally trapped a beetle in Richland. So far, we've captured over 1,700 adult beetles as needed, and we're actually continually adding traps. Because of these detections outside of the infested zone, we really want to make sure that you're able to find them and keep up to date and be on top of things and keep yourselves informed. So we created this real-time detection map. You can actually go online to our website and find this map so you can see where all the beetle captures are. I'm going to explain it to you a little bit. So you see the area in the very middle, right? This red spot here. The red square kind of overlaid, it's not exactly a pure square, but that's going to be the original boundaries of the infested and treatment and proposed area. Any red diamond you see, there's the ones in the middle here. Then top left of the picture, that's going to be Wapato. And then don't forget to miss on the very bottom right, there's one sole diamond here, and that's going to be Richland, okay? So you can actually go online and you can see all these new detections. Now we're going to keep going on with this map and keep capturing beetles, keep expanding our traps if needed throughout the rest of the adult season. And then when October kind of ends, we'll go back and look at this map, see where the beetles are, and then begin reevaluating our trapping plans for next year. The last thing I want to touch on, I mentioned that we found some new beetles in Wapato and Richland, okay? So I want to show you what our response grid looks like now. Those green squares are still our beetle traps, but you can see here that this middle area of Grandview, and now you can see a closer up version of Wapato and Richland. Over in Wapato, we're adding additional traps. Today was actually the first day we checked the traps, Out of 15 of the traps, we captured 54 beetles. And you can see the little pictures of the beetles there showing you where they've been found. Over in Richland here, we started deploying traps. The rest of the traps are going to go up on Monday, and inspections will begin early next week. So remember, you can go back online and look at that real-time detection map. Finally, in the middle there, that's the response grid around Grandview, and you can see where the beetles are getting caught as well. Okay, so we talked about treatment, we talked about trapping. Now I kind of want to touch on transport, or those hitchhikers, okay? As part of proposing that quarantine, we want to keep those beetles from traveling, right? You can see here that beetles were either introduced again in Wapato and Richland, or they're somehow traveling. So we want to make sure that we're keeping them off of those yard debris, keeping them off from moving them, and keeping them out of that soil. So we created a drop-off site inside that infested zone in Grandview where residents can bring their yard debris, okay? And we want them to bring their yard debris from that mid-May to that mid-October sign when those adult beetles could be present on it, okay? Now, you can take your accepted items here. You will need to provide a proof of location, so bring a form of identification plus a form of address. They're going to accept brushes, branches, roots, leaves, grass clippings, your fruit and vegetable tree trimmings, weeds, flowers, plants, shrubs. And then if you have like some grass with maybe a little bit of topsoil or some sod with that grass too, that'll be accepted as well. Okay. Now, some people in Grandview, I understand modes of transportation down here might not be feasible. So the alternate option is to leave those yard debris on that site, right? And not move it to a different area to let the beetles travel further. Okay. So Kin, thinking about this, keeping those beetles from spreading, keeping them from hitchhiking, we're going to go back into diving into that proposed quarantine and what you've heard me talk about. So actually, we had a public hearing this week, okay? And public comments were accepted and made. If all that went well and that quarantine is adopted or proposed, it'll become effective potentially this September if it is adopted, okay? Now we're going to move over to the right side of the screen, and I'm going to go ahead and catch you up on this process if you've missed it. Also, the link to the exact quarantine page is right there, but you can also go to our website at the bottom, agr.wa.gov/beetles, to find this information as well. So I mentioned in 2021, we began this whole quarantine process, and then it developed. The first thing we did was kind of take that initial language and started gathering more information. Well, what really can the beetle travel on and what really can it affect, okay? And we drafted that language and sent it out to stakeholders and businesses, like I mentioned, and said, how can it affect you? Kind of finalized up that language, and then we held that public hearing, okay? Now, I just kind of want to emphasize that proposing a quarantine is really to keep the beetles from spreading, because we don't want them to end up in areas outside of an infested zone and outside of a treatment area. So that's kind of all I'm going to talk about on what WSDA has done, what we are doing, and what the future is going to look like, okay? Remember, it's going to be multiple years of eradication and really a combined effort of our state agencies, public, growers, industry, and etc. So with that being said, I really want to talk about how you can help, how you can protect your gardens, your farms, and even just the lawn in your backyard. Okay, I know Grandview especially is a very pretty town, and lots of people take pride in having those nice looking yards. So WSDA really wants to count and find every single beetle. We don't want to miss one. So if you see a beetle, report a beetle. When you report, try to grab a picture, right? That way we can confirm and say, yes, that's a Japanese beetle. So if you see it, snap it and send it, okay? Take that picture and report it to us at the WSDA. If you can collect it, even better. There's a couple different ways to report. You can go online to our website, shoot an email to pestprogram@agr.wa.gov, or call our hotline. I will tell you that submitting an online report or shooting an email gets you a little bit of faster result, okay? Second thing to do, in addition to reporting and letting us know where and how many, you can actually trap the beetles yourself, okay? Removing adult beetles prevents them from going back to the soil to lay eggs. So if we're keeping them from laying eggs, we're decreasing and potentially even lowering that population. There's two different ways you can do this. You can purchase your own or make your own trap. Traps are available online. Home and garden stores typically sell them. If you're purchasing a trap, just follow those traps instructions. They come in different shapes and sizes. Some of them are reusable, some of them aren't. So just make sure you follow those instructions. The other thing you can do is you can literally pick beetles off yourself if you're seeing them. They don't bite, they don't sting, right? So you can just reach your hand in there and grab them. It's best to pick beetles early in the morning or late at night so their chances of flying off are less. But if you're picking them off, you can just drop them in a cup of soapy water, or you can put them in a bag and toss them in the freezer to kill them as well. Okay. You're going to want to do this when they're adults. So that's going to be, again, that mid-May to October. It's going to be now, okay, when you will see the adults. The last thing, if you are trapping or collecting, remember, we really want to count every single beetle. So go online and report how many beetles you caught. Or if you're in Grandview, you can drop them off at one of our various drop-off locations. The locations are available for you on our website. Okay. The last thing is going back to that treatment. Remember, consent to treat your properties are going to be coming back out. So be on the lookout for them. And if you get them, if you have any questions about it, go ahead and reach out to us. We're more than happy to answer them. But everyone treating those grassy areas is going to help keep those beetle populations at bay. And multiple years of treatment, is really going to do things. Okay. Now, if you're seeing adult beetles now, or you have a garden or something, and you really want to get rid of those pesky critters, you can consult your local WSU extension. You can consult a pest control company, potentially someone at a local home and garden store who is knowledgeable. But we do have on our website WSU treatment options. Okay. Personally, just remember beetles come in different shapes at different forms at different times of the year. So just make sure you're reading that carefully and doing the proper treatment if beetles have been detected. And most importantly, remember, stay informed and stay connected. It's hard to know what to do if you don't know what problem is going on. So again, our website, I'm constantly now updating it, so things should go more smoothly. You should be able to find information there. We do run and manage a Japanese beetle Facebook group. It's WA State Japanese Beetle Watch. If you're into social medias and want to connect with others, it's a good way to stay alert, as well as constantly updates are being pushed through there. The last thing to do is to sign up for email alerts. I actually sent one out this afternoon. So if you got it, it's called a Beetle Blast. If not, it's just an update that goes to your email with different sections of what's going on with the project, how many beetles we've caught and where, as well as talking about what is coming up for the project. So with that being said, this is kind of all that I want to talk to you, but I really want to allow chances for questions and answers. I saw things coming through the chat box, so I'm going to go back and answer those, but feel free to post any chats or any questions that you have in the chat box at this time. I also do want to say that in our audience with us is Camilo Acosta, who is our eradication coordinator, and Amber Betts, who is our media relations specialist. They are here to help field and answer questions as well. So there is a question in the chat box. Can we find out if our neighbors are consented? Unfortunately, that is kind of private data, right? We want to respect each and every other's privacy. So if you ask us directly if your neighbors have consented, we won't necessarily be able to answer that. But if you're really interested, you can go and ask your neighbor or come tell them to ask us about the whole process. Amber, if you would like to read the questions, you're more than welcome to. There's another question in the chat box. Are the adults actively seeking grass to lay their eggs, or do they randomly lay their eggs in all soil? So, Camilo, do you want to take the answer to this one?
Yeah, I can take that, Cassie. So usually, when the beetles are feeding on vegetation, a lot of times it just so happens that there is grass below them, and so they'll do the easiest thing, which is drop off of where they're feeding and lay eggs directly below. Um, and so it does happen where beetles will lay in areas that are just plain soil, especially if you're growing. I've seen it actually in Grandview in places where people were growing corn and growing garlic, growing peppers, and there's no grass um, in their planter boxes, but we were still finding lots of grubs and eventually found a lot of beetles in that garden as well. Um, and so yes, they can lay eggs in non-sod areas, but they do prefer to lay them where grass is because that will give their offspring, their larvae, a higher chance of survival.
Awesome, thanks. And if you didn't all know, that is Camilo Acosta, our eradication coordinator. He's very knowledgeable. There's a question in here, does 7 kill the adults, question mark? I did not have this info you are sharing and thought the treatment was for all of them and haven't seen them, but there is ample evidence that they are there. I tried to report on the phone line, but it connected to the Hornet site. So if you recall, when I'm talking about the tree, we applied it to turf or to residential grass in the spring, right? That treatment targeted the grubs that are going to be produced now. So the treatment is going to start being effective. We won't be really starting to see the results until next year, until we're able to showcase that, yes, the population is potentially in a decline, okay? Rhonda, I'll go ahead and message you separately at the end so I can make sure you have all the correct reporting info. If you're seeing those adults now, remember, you can pick them off yourself. You can put a trap up for them, or you can look up that you can contact WSU for recommendations, or I'll make sure you get a copy of that treatment. Okay. So I'll send you a separate message. Don't hop off until I can get that over to you. Okay.
Cassie, I can take the next question from Arturo.
Yeah.
So I think Arturo's asking if the larvae can damage apples. And no, they cannot damage apples. The larvae pretty much exclusively damage the roots of ornamental grass and sometimes of ornamental plants, but usually it's just the grass. So your apples are safe from the larvae.
The adults like to eat buds of flowers, however, and green leafy material. There is another question in the chat box. What's the statement question? We have found and seen grubs in non-sod areas. What can we do about those? So this is kind of a twofold answer. The first thing I'm going to say is definitely trap. The second thing I'm going to say is potentially treatment. So remember, putting a trap up is going to attract those adults and remove them, okay? Then further treating them in non-sod areas, like if you're trying to get them out of your garden or something, then you're going to need to potentially consult an extension specialist, pest control company, or different forms of recommendation. Removing all vegetation also, then those grubs won't have anything to feast. They won't be able to move to an area where there is sod, where they can consume those grass roots. Okay, Camilo, I'm going to have you answer this one.
Yep.
Is there a type of grass root that they prefer or a type that they will not feed on?
So I want to answer this question from Jared, and then a question that Cindy posted as well that's asking, will they also lay eggs on native grasses? And so to answer both those questions, and one, ornamental grasses are what they prefer, and most of the ornamental grasses that we have in our lawns, at our ballparks, at our golf courses, those are all non-native grass. It's just that we as humans, like it for recreational and aesthetics, and so that is what they have grown to prefer. And usually native grasses are pretty safe from them. We don't tend to find them underground or feeding on native grasses.
Awesome. Kind of going off that and the question that was answered earlier about treatments only in the grass, but we're seeing them in flower beds. I do kind of want to remind everybody that, again, this is a multi-year treatment, and treatments are dependent on kind of legislative funding and that whole process. So treatments could have the potential to stay the same or develop, but remember, trapping and potentially even treating yourself is going to keep them away from your flower and garden beds. The last thing I want to mention about if you are trapping, right, and you're hanging a trap, don't put it directly inside of your garden bed because that's where the beetles are attracted to. So then they're going to kind of rush into that trap, potentially eating your flowers on the way. So make sure it's kind of on the edge or a few feet from that. So that way the beetles aren't eating as they're going to the trap. I am not seeing, oh, there's one more question here. Camille, I'll go ahead and have you answer it. Are particular crop covers such as fescue susceptible to be host to larvae?
Let's see, particular cover crops such as fescue. Maggie, that's something that I would have to do some research and get back to you on. I'm not sure about the answer to that one. Ryan, would you know?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Uh, yeah, it probably, I mean, if they'll go after that, um, they would prefer other things. But if that's there, and there's with this high amount of beetles, yes.
Yeah, so it's kind of going to be, remember, a combined effort of WSDI residents, potentially even commercial growers that we're targeting all that grass, including orchard grass and residential lawns. And we're really going to keep these beetles at bay and keep them from transporting. Okay. I'm not seeing any other questions come through from the chat box. I really wanted to thank you for taking some time out of your day to learn more and educate yourself so that you can go ahead and further educate others. Rhonda, don't go ahead and leave yet. I'm going to send you a separate message with some links. If anyone has any questions further, feel free to visit that website and contact us, but I'll also go ahead and post my personal email in the chat box. Thank you and have a great night.